Hello and welcome to Chapter 10, Section 1. We are only covering Section 1 in Chapter 10, and this section will seem a little bit out of place for you. It does not seem to align with all of the financial skills we've been talking about in Chapter 9, but it really is more of a lesson on logic. So if you attended high school in Virginia and you took a geometry course, you definitely covered these skills, but it may have been quite some time since you did that. So let's take a quick spin through the vocabulary. Remember that we can have things called a conditional statement. If that's new for you, then what a conditional statement is an if-then statement. So if I were to say, if it is cold outside, then I will wear a coat. The if is the clue that you are talking about the hypothesis. So if it is cold outside, that it is cold outside part would be the hypothesis that comes at the beginning. And the then signals that you're going to be hearing about the conclusion. So I will put on a coat would be the conclusion of that statement. Now, the converse and the inverse and the contrapositive are different variations on the conditional statement. Okay. Now, one thing I want to explain before I discuss those is the idea of negation. The negation is a statement which has the opposite truth value of the original statement. So the negation of a conditional, if P, then Q, is P and not Q. Now, I prefer to think of this a little bit more realistically. So let's say that I have a statement that says it is cold outside. Then the opposite of that would be it is not cold outside. So that is just saying the opposite meaning. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about that first was because you need to understand that for the converse, no, not for the converse, but for the contrapositive and for the inverse. So the converse statement simply takes the conditional statement, it takes the hypothesis and the conclusion, and it swaps them out. The inverse statement does not swap anything, but it changes both the hypothesis and the conclusion to the opposite or the negation. And then the contrapositive is a combination of both. It swaps the hypothesis and conclusion and applies the negation. So I'll show you some examples of this in a minute because it won't make a whole lot of sense until you see an example. Now, the last couple of vocabulary, converse error. So the error made when someone mistakenly assumes that the converse is logically equivalent to the original conditional. And that does not always happen. In fact, that is not a guarantee. Two statements are logically equivalent if they both say the same thing. So, for example, if it is sunny, then we will go to the beach is logically equivalent to if we do not go to the beach, then it is not sunny. So the two statements there that are logically equivalent are the converse and the contrapositive. Let's see here. A little bit of backstory. If you want to pause the video and read that, you can. But let's go over here and take a look at an example. So let's say that we have a conditional that says, if I eat it, then I see it. So basically that's saying I can see what I eat. Now what they've done here, and you know I'm getting the highlighter out, the part that comes after the if, they're labeling that with the capital P because when you write conditional statements, it all of a sudden feels like you've left a math class and gone into an English class. It's a lot of writing. So they use the symbols in order to be a little more concise about it. Now the conclusion, I'm going to color that in blue. That comes after the then statement, and we are labeling that with a Q. Okay, so when we go to create the contrapositive, notice that the Q has swapped places with the P. And I tell my students in high school that this is a swap or a switch. So then we take the Q statement, I see it, and we put that first. And then we put I eat it, which came first before, and we put it at the end. So we've taken the P and the Q and we've swapped it. Now I'm going to go down here to inverse. I like to do this one first before contrapositive. This one is a negation. So notice that the P and the Q are still in their original spots. See how here the P is first and the Q is second, and the P is first and the Q is second. But what they're going to do with P is they're going to negate the P, and they're going to take the Q and negate that as well. So instead of I eat it being P, we would say the opposite of that. We would say I don't eat it. Same thing with Q. I see it. The opposite of that is I don't see it. And that is how we create the inverse conditional statement. Now, a contrapositive, that is both, that is a combination of the converse and the inverse. So not only are we swapping the P and the Q, but we are negating the P and the Q. Okay, so that's just, kind of strange. Not everybody is comfortable with that. Okay, the converse is not logically equivalent to its conditional, but the contrapositive is. The contrapositive is always logically equivalent to its conditional. All right, and then another example. State the converse, inverse, and contrapositive and negation of the following statement and indicate a pair of statements that are logically equivalent. Well, I know the logically equivalent right off the bat. It's going to be this, and it's going to be this. Okay, I know that right off the bat. So that's not a problem. Now let's talk about how we form these. And I want to use a different color. So they are serving French fries. That's my hypothesis. I am going to lunch. That is my conclusion. So you can see here, I go to lunch comes first in the converse. They are serving fries comes second. These two just got swapped. The inverse is the negation of both. So if they are not serving French fries, then I am not going to lunch. The contrapositive is a combination of both. If I don't go to lunch or I'm not going to lunch, then they are not serving French fries. And then the negation is they serve fries and I don't go to lunch. So this is not as important. These are hugely important. When you look in your practice exam, you will see these kinds of things. Assume the conditional statement is true and you go to lunch. Does that mean they're serving fries? The answer is no. This is the converse error, assuming that the converse and the conditional are logically equivalent. You may have gone to lunch and decided, well, they're not serving fries, but they've got potato chips, so that's good enough. So that is not a guarantee. Now, the pairs of statements that are logically equivalent are the conditional and the contrapositive. They're always equivalent, and the inverse and the converse are always logically equivalent. Now, write the statement, I mean what I say, as a conditional if-then statement. So every time you say something, you mean it. So if I say it would be your hypothesis, then I mean it. That would be the conclusion part. Now, we haven't discussed a biconditional that much, but biconditionals have a special phrase connecting the hypothesis and conclusion. And that phrase is if and only if. So notice this is kind of a spin-off of the conditional statement. It says, I will go to lunch if and only if they are serving fries. So I could write this two ways. I could say, if I go to lunch, then they are serving fries. Or I could write it backwards. If they are serving fries, then I will go to lunch. I can write it either direction. And which conditional from number 5 is the only if part? The only if part is the if I go to lunch, then they are serving fries. Okay, so just a little logic lesson for you there. I hope that helps, and thank you so much for watching.